Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming. What I'd like to do is set the stage by explaining the mechanics of chain migration, the scale of chain migration, and what provisions in our current immigration law contribute to it and drive it. And then also say a few words about how this could play out with certain legislative proposals that are on the table now, because after all, that's the other reason we're talking about chain migration, is that there is legislation, not only the RAISE Act, but also proposals for an amnesty for people with DACA, and chain migration really helps determine what the ultimate impact of such legislation would be. So legal immigration now is over 1 million a year, 1 million legal immigrants that we admit every year. And it's been over 1 million a year since 2005. And I've been able to estimate what the 2016 numbers will be. They haven't been released yet officially by DHS. But it looks like, based on some of the administrative data that is public, that 2016 legal immigration will be about 7% or possibly more higher than 2015. And in fact, legal immigration numbers have risen 74% since 1965, when our current immigration system was established. The growth in immigration is due to a couple of things. Sometimes it's because we create new immigration categories or change the law, like adding the diversity visa lottery or the 1990 Act, or increasing or decreasing the number of refugees. But a lot of it, of the growth, is because of chain migration. And that is because of the phenomenon that Mark described that has an exponential impact on the numbers. When you let's say you are sponsored for an employment-based green card, or win the lottery, or come in as a refugee. When you get a green card, the immediate family members that you have get that green card at the same time, or the immigrant visa if you're coming from overseas, your spouse and your children who are under the age of 21. But if you come in by yourself as a new initiating immigrant, as some have called them, and you're not married, let's say you've been a student here, get a work visa, and adjust to an employment-based green card, if you then marry someone who is not a citizen, that's chain migration. If that person you marry has children, they also get to migrate with them if they're under the age of 21. If you have adult sons and daughters, and they have children, you can sponsor them usually when you become a citizen, but also if you have a green card. If they're unmarried, if they're married, you can sponsor them after you become a citizen. And when you become a citizen, you can sponsor your parents and your sisters and brothers. And all of those folks can, in turn, sponsor other immigrants. And there's a handout on the table that has some charts and graphs that enumerate the categories that we allow for family migration. All of these categories, except for two, have numerical limits. And what kind of reins in the growth in chain migration is the numerical limits that we have in some categories. But two of the largest categories are not limited in number each year, and that is spouses of U.S. citizens and their children, and parents of U.S. citizens. And so that is why those numbers have been growing dramatically, because they are not constrained by numerical limits, and they increase exponentially. And if you have a chance to look at the handout, there's a line graph showing what has happened with the numbers in the parents category and the spouse category over time. And each of these bumps in immigration can be traced back to a specific event in which legal immigration was increased and more people then became citizens and had the opportunity to sponsor family members. And the parents category is one of the fastest growing in our legal immigration system, and it's now 3 times the number that it was back in the early 1980s. So scholars have long tried to calculate exactly what is the level of chain migration. And a team of researchers from Princeton University studied the administrative data and determined that over the last 35 years, chain migration has made up almost 2/3 of our total legal immigration flow. And in 2015, I show how this happens. It's been about 50% of our total legal immigration in the last few years. The reason for that is not so much because immigrants are sponsoring fewer family members, but because we have a larger share of our legal immigration is first-time immigrants, like refugees in particular, and asylees, and lottery winners. Those are all what we call initiating immigrants. So it's a very significant chunk of our legal immigration system. They calculated that the average new immigrant, who is the first one in their family to migrate to the United States, will ultimately sponsor an average of 3.45 family members. So you could say for every 2 new immigrants that we admit, ultimately there will be an average of 7 additional green cards from that initiating immigrant. So you can see that there is a multiplier effect. And the growth is built into our immigration system. Chain migration has also contributed to the aging of our immigration, of legal immigration to the United States. Several decades ago, only about 17% of new immigrants we admitted were over the age of 50. And nowadays, it's up over 21% are coming in over the age of 50. And this has implications as well for the fiscal impacts of our immigration system that we need to consider now much more than even a couple of decades ago. So because of chain migration, without changes to current law, any change that we make to expand the number of legal admissions to the United States is going to have a larger impact over time. So if, for example, we were to offer green cards in the form of an amnesty to people with DACA, which is one of the legislative proposals now being considered, it's estimated that roughly 700,000 people now have DACA status. Because of the way our law works, once they receive their green card, of course, they would immediately be able to sponsor spouses, although some studies have suggested that not very many people who have DACA would have spouses that they would sponsor, but there would be a few. But the big chain migration impact would be because they would be, after obtaining citizenship after 5 years, able to sponsor their parents, most of whom are believed to be living in the country illegally. In addition, they would be able to sponsor siblings upon getting citizenship. And then, of course, that process would take a long time because of the long waiting lists in our legal immigration system. Our law actually promises a green card to more people than can be admitted in any given year, which causes the wait list to build up and so on, which is a different problem. But that does slow down the chain migration somewhat. But I calculated that if Congress were to pass an amnesty for people with DACA, it would ultimately result in at least 2 million new legal immigrants over time because of chain migration. The original 700,000 people with DACA and at least 1.4 million additional immigrants that they would sponsor, which is at a rate lower than the 3.45 multiplier. But it's still, I think that's a conservative estimate of what we could expect from a DACA amnesty, which is something important to consider and why I think it's very important that if an amnesty is to be enacted, there should be some offsetting, mitigating changes to our legal immigration system to minimize the effect of an amnesty like that. So what I'd like to do now is hear from Dr. Teitlebaum and Senator Perdue about what some of the proposals for reform would look like and how they would affect chain migration. Thank you.